many notable activists, actually being Jewish. As history progressed, there were and still are a variety of causes being focused on by the community. If you look at any social justice movement within the last 100 years, you in an area that has Jews, you'll most likely see whether it's a more notable activist or people behind the scenes, that there was a contribution by the Jewish community. Let's go on to the next one. So historic examples of Jews taking action: Jewish resistance against anti-Semitism, the suffrage movement, civil rights movement, and Jewish activism to help Soviet Jewry. Jewish resistance against anti-Semitism. Now, I know this is for many of us, a lot clearer of a cause to take action against, but Jews have gathered to resist anti-Semitism and violence towards the community throughout the years. Two of the biggest time periods that come to mind is during the Holocaust and fighting against the British forces to establish Israel. These efforts varied from what would be considered violence, killing, planning attacks, to nonviolence and technically illegal actions like forging documents to help Jews escape Nazi Germany. Here in the photos, you can see some of Jewish established groups to protect themselves. Next up, we have the suffrage movement. Jewish involvement in getting votes for women during the suffrage movement started in the 1800s, specifically in America. Their work varied from organizing, giving speeches, establishing coalitions and groups, including when I read it, I was like, what? Including some of their actions included disrupting synagogues to force the issue into community dialogue. One such incident was in the UK, where 3 women disrupted services during Yom Kippur to highlight the fact that there was inequality, and they were quickly escorted out. And there was news coverage in the Jewish community at the time looking down at what they did, but it definitely got things moving. Other things they did was lobbying and fundraising. An additional fun fact is that Jews were integral to the voting victory for women in New York in 1917. Here, actually, in these photos are examples of Jewish women taking action in the period of the women's suffrage movement. The woman actually speaking right here where my mouse is Jewish, and as you can see, there's a big crowd around her. So she was one of the people that was playing an integral role in her area. Next up, civil rights movement. Jews were involved in many aspects of the civil rights movement, from helping fund the activism because some people were concerned about being too out there and drawing attention to the Jewish community and anti-Semitism that would come with it, which happened either way. Helping with legal issues, those that were lawyers representing activists that were arrested, or helping find legal arguments to actually find a way to create equality and civil rights. Signing people up to vote during the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964. Getting arrested doing civil disobedience and sit-ins, where people would not leave lunch counters even after being asked, and then were forcibly removed and arrested. Marching on Selma with Dr. Luther King Jr., and actually to helping win the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling, which, as we know, is what helped establish legal equality in this case. And a lot of lawyers, Jewish lawyers, were helping out in the background, filing and doing research. I just realized I completely forgot to add the Soviet Jewry slide, but I will elaborate on that. Jews, especially in America, but in other places as well, were very involved in helping their Jewish brothers and sisters that were stuck in Soviet Russia who were being persecuted and not able to leave. My grandmother actually went to Soviet Russia multiple times, was tracked by the KGB, and people she worked with had to like smuggle things into the country that Jews needed, whether that was like medical equipment to do amputations or necessary items for people that needed medication. And in the US, there was a lot of mobilization where they were bringing people together to try to create pressure to help the Jews in that area. An example is where people actually did do civil disobedience in America to, again, like I said, put pressure on authorities to make a change for what was happening in the Soviet Union, and specifically to help get Jews out. Modern day examples. Now, this slide, I feel like encapsulates pretty much everything that is trying to be said here with these photos. Jewish activists of many backgrounds are involved in modern day movements and actions. As you can see here with the top photo of Haredim, or very religious Jews here in Israel, are blocking a bus by sitting or lying on the road, and police are trying to drag them away. And on the bottom left, we see, I believe this is also in Israel, we see environmental activists also lying in the road, blocking traffic to highlight their cause. And like I said, there is a common theme between the actions both secular and Orthodox activists take, with an overlap of tactics. Yes, there's regular protesting, there's lobbying, trying to get into the media, having marches, but there's also civil disobedience, which, for example, both of these photos show, where Jews are blocking the street by lying in it to protest their cause. So we know that the Jewish community across the spectrum has and continues to support activism. It just depends on what that cause is. While the causes of what people are willing to get arrested for or just leave their houses to speak up about may be different, with Haredim in that photo I just showed, to my knowledge, was to protest transportation on Shabbos or Shabbat. Other causes that they often do civil disobedience for or activism is protesting the Israeli army mandate. Historically, last couple of years, COVID restrictions. Secular Jews have also protested. This is specifically in Israel, just because that's where a huge concentration of Jews are. COVID restrictions, LGBTQ rights, climate change, and other issues depending on a person's background and what they find to be their passion or something that really speaks to them. So it's clear that the Jewish community and community members across religious spectrums have partaken in, or at least support, activism. So much so that there are many examples of religious and non-religious Jews taking part in civil disobedience, like I said before, which is breaking an unjust law. And another example that comes to mind for anyone who's aware of the Aguna crisis, which is Jewish women that are not able to get a divorce through Jewish law. There have actually been recent actions sprouting up, including disrupting shiurim, which is like Jewish learning. There were two men that disrupted a women's meeting where they were learning Torah to put pressure on the woman who was leading the lesson, who was enabling her son who was refusing a get, which is a Jewish divorce. There have been Orthodox community members that have been protesting outside schools because the principal is enabling someone who's refusing a Jewish divorce from his wife, and protesting outside people's houses. These are things that for other causes might be considered radical, but in this case is something that's becoming more and more acceptable or normalized. So like I said before, it's just a matter of if the cause is something that's deemed worthy enough or normalized enough and urgent enough of an issue. But a lot of these tactics that activists use in Jewish society or not Jewish society are in some cases deemed acceptable across different religious spectrums. So, Jewish thought and law that supports activism. Let's break down why advocating for animals, and even more so, taking direct action for animals, is not only something important for us to do, but supported by Jewish thought and law. So the history of Judaism is one of resistance and doing what's right, even if it's going against the grain. One of the biggest examples of resistance or not following the law of the land was in Egypt. Midwives Shifra and Puah, letting Moses live despite the law of the land being one where Jewish babies that were born male were supposed to be killed. Because of that, he survived and led the Jews out of Egypt to become a people we now are. There are also a collection of examples in the Torah and Talmud that makes it clear that resistance is woven throughout our history and values. Some examples include when there were Jewish kings and there were unjust situations going against what was being decreed. Other examples were, let me see, I believe that's on another slide, sorry. But yeah, there are a lot of examples of throughout our history, not just modern day or in the last 100 years or so, there being Jewish figures that have been speaking up or taking action against what might have been considered, oh no, you're just supposed to follow what's being done. But also Judaism itself, for a lot of time, what's being done and the customs is and even Jewish law following that might be considered not right or unusual, something that might be uncomfortable to do. But for those that believe in Jewish law, they believe that's the right thing. And so they're still going to do that. And here we have justice, justice, you shall pursue, which is a more well-known quote that is translated from Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof. A snippet from an article on H.com explains this further, which is, why, ask the rabbis, is the word justice repeated twice in the verse? The answer goes to the heart of the biblical idea for the achievement of a just and honorable universe. Only by justice, by way of justice, is legitimate. The end does not justify the means. Seek the good, but do not embrace evil in order to achieve it. So this is one of the many quotes that can definitely support pursuing justice. And a lot of times, justice comes through means of taking action, specifically direct action, which is confronting what's going on, doing something that may be uncomfortable, speaking about a topic that people might not want to talk about. And let's go on to the next one. Okay, apologize. Okay, so there are also Jewish laws being violated from industries that use and exploit animals. There are so many that we do not have time to go into all of them, but they are being repeatedly violated. And some examples are Tsar Bali Chaim, which is actually one of the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, which highlights the Noahide laws, which highlights that it's that important, that it's one of those commandments that everyone should be following according to Jewish law. Tsar Bali Chaim is unnecessary animal cruelty. And in a time where things are done in these industries where it's being maximized for profit, the suffering going on is completely unnecessary. It's for human benefit. And in a time where there are so many more alternatives, it can be argued that the whole concept of raising animals for food, especially, or even clothing like fur when there are alternatives, is unnecessary. And then that would be violating Tsar Bali Chaim because it is unnecessary animal cruelty. Another violation of Jewish law that comes up a lot is not feeding animals, is violating the commandment of not feeding animals in your care before yourself. So a lot of times animals in these industries can't even access food and water because of how they're raised and genetically modified and just not physically able to get to food and water, let alone people that are running these farms, making sure that the animals are getting food first. It's not even feasible to make sure that every single animal is getting food. And it would be way late in the day, if even, for every animal in a lot of these farms to get food before the person that's running it, because of the sheer amount of animals usually packed into barns or sheds and on food lots. Let's see what else. Not wasting resources, otherwise known as baltashchis. I personally do not like the idea of baltashchis applying to the animals itself, saying that animals are commodities, but there is a lot of waste, quote unquote, that some people might argue of animals themselves being thrown out, in the sense that with certain industries, the males are not usable and profitable for their lack of being able to lay eggs or produce milk, and then they're killed. Animals that are sick that they don't want to bother to give vet care to because, again, not profitable, are just left to die and then thrown out. But also the resources that go into running industries like this, the amount of water that is being used, the soil that's being polluted from fecal runoff from these farms, the amount of crops being grown to raise these animals when they could be allotted to straight to humans instead of going through animals. And just the amount of resources, like I said, going through all this, the intensive production that's happening is resources of our precious earth that are certainly not being used efficiently, but arguably, again, like I said, wasted because these industries are arguably not necessary, or certainly not on the scale that they currently are. Another Jewish law that is being violated is the one to take care of one's health. And we now know more and more studies are coming out that animal flesh, dairy, and eggs are not good for our health, or certainly have things that can lead to health issues, whether that's cholesterol in eggs or dairy leading to weakened bones. There's some talk, there's talks about that. Cow flesh being carcinogen likened. And let's see what else. Yes, I believe that was it. So not only do these concepts support Jews taking action, but combined with the fact that Jewish laws, only a few of them I mentioned, there are a lot more, are being violated by our harm towards animals in pursuit of using them, it can be argued that we need to do something. So why take action for animals specifically? Right now, as we speak, in almost countless amounts of individuals are suffering, some in cages, behind bars, forced to be experimented on, or poor form for human entertainment. Others are being trucked far distances without food, water, and then are ultimately forced to watch their friends die, knowing that they are next. I know what I said just paints a very dark picture and was honestly very blunt, but it is the truth. And it will still be the truth, even if we shy away from thinking about it or shying away from doing something to stop it. So knowing this information, we are put into a position to choose. Will we sit on the sidelines and have to say we didn't do anything to help stop the suffering of animals? Or will we step up and take action in ways that we are able to according to our own situations or limitations? And that's pretty much the end of the slide. I will go on to say that I would love to connect with anybody or answer any questions or give any sources to anything I mentioned, or any sources that some of what I mentioned came from, where there's more information and elaborates more. I will also say we are looking for people who want to get more involved. We're in the process of really planning long-term for campaigns and just doing as much as we can behind the scenes before we are full-fledged trying to mobilize and bring people together to take action. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work and research being done, and just structuring the organization to be in the best capacity to be able to run events with as many Jews that are willing to join and allies that are willing to help out. So here is my information. I can leave it up for a little bit. If anyone has any questions, I can leave this up in the meantime. So yes, thank you, everybody. And thank you for bearing with me as I was stumbling a bit. It's been a long day, but I'm so glad to be here with everybody. Let's see.
So awesome. Thank you so very much. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to type them in the chat or anything. Give you a little chance to ask a question here. Benjamin, you have a question. Do you want to do it in the chat? Do you want to unmute?
Sure, I'll unmute. Thanks so much for the presentation. I'm currently facilitating an effective altruism and Judaism course. It's the first time it's ever been done, and I wonder if you're already plugged into the folks who are doing that, if that's something that's of interest to you.
I did not know there's a course. I know of effective altruism. I would love to hear more about it if we want to connect offline.
Cool.
Or
it's the first time it's happening. So I'll send you an email, but it's the first time it's happening, but it's pretty cool. And
wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Welfare. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Any more questions? All right. Okay. Well,
Thank you, everybody.
Next up, we have Rabbi Yanklowitz. He's the president of Shamayim and the author of 10 books on Jewish ethics. Currently serving as the president and dean of Valley Bite Midrash, and serves as the founder and president of another organization as well. So he's a very busy guy in addition to being very knowledgeable. And we're so lucky to have him here to share information with you and all of us. So on that note, we'll let him take it away.
Thanks, John. That's so nice to meet you here, and thanks for organizing this.
Sure.
And great to see many friends. Hi, Jeffrey, and our Jiffa friends. Hi, Melissa and Jonathan, and so many others. And Meira, I didn't know about this work you were doing, so that's cool to learn about that. And so many others. Yes, faces I recognize, names I recognize. Hi, everyone. And you know, I'm really excited about spending our 25 minutes together today, thinking about how our veganism can enhance our individual and collective spirituality. And I think that it is easy for some to feel that we can check the box. Hey, I made it. Hey, I made it. You know, I'm vegan. I'm on the good side now. I just proselytize, right? And but the question is, how can this ethic be one that inspires us to go towards more breadth and towards more depth, and to go on the breadth side to building community, to advocating, to building a movement, a broader movement together, and on the depth level of how that can go deeper for ourselves, for our own growth and actualization. And I think part of the premise I'm operating on here is in the spiritual realm, that there is a oneness to return to. There is an interconnectedness of all life, and there's a shared breadth. And for us to tap into that there's a foundation of love and compassion in the world. I know many feel the instability of the world, given an election day, given an Israeli election day, given climate change. It can feel like the earth is opening up to swallow at times. But my spirituality leads me to an understanding that the foundation of existence, that kind of all ontological reality, is one of compassion, of love. It's an olam chesed. It's a world of kindness and love. And if we embrace that we are Adam on the Adamah, we are people on the earth, that we also are made up of this stuff of love. And it's not obvious. And I don't point out these two cases I'm about to share because I have in some way mastered compassion in my life. I've got many areas where it remains difficult, even where some areas it remains easy. And we all have our different work. But, you know, we had a social justice interfaith dinner a few days ago, and one of the participants, you know, reached out before and said, oh, do you mind? I know you care about animals. Do you mind if I wear my favorite leather shirt? And I was partially like, oh, that's so nice that you asked. You know, some people might not ask. And then I was partially like, wait a minute, like this is about, you know, leaders that are working to build a more just and compassionate world. Like, how is that even a question, especially if you know you're coming to a vegan house? And so it's an area where like some of us take on causes, but the causes that are so connected to it are overseen. Or yesterday I spoke on an interfaith death penalty panel, and I made sure one of the questions was, what are other causes that are not the death penalty that are in some ways related? And I immediately went first and said, well, actually, I think factory farming is very much developed off the mass incarceration system. And the two systems are very interconnected in how capitalism exploits bodies. And, you know, and kind of talked to, and everybody's face dropped, like, you did what? Like, we're here to talk about death penalty and you're bringing in animals? Like, why would you think this is a space to talk about this? But, you know, and I didn't like hit him over the head with it, you know, but it was a space where I got the process, how for me, this is not a diet. This is a movement for nonviolence. This is a movement for peaceful fields, right? Right, John? So we want to live in peaceful fields. And so if someone like me thinks that we shouldn't take life, human life, you know, or non-human life, then, you know, we have to figure out how we can live with a consciousness that is going to get us there. Because I believe on this election day, I believe it all the more so, political wins aren't going to get us there. We need political wins, right? We need political wins, but those things can be reversed. We see in California with the prop under attack right now, a prop that was one of the greatest animal welfare victories on the planet, and how easily, if the Supreme Court chooses to knock that down, they can. And so too, how elections, things can change, legislation can be overturned. What we need is a spiritual revolution. We need the political wins, but we need a spiritual revolution. And that means that we're operating on a higher spiritual consciousness of interconnectivity. It means that we have some sense of sharing. And that's why, John, I love that you're bringing, you know, groups together, because it's so hard to think about collaboration. It is so hard to think about together spaces, because it often can feel like other denominations, other religions, other organizations, other ideologies are fundamentally a threat in a zero-sum game. But if we're working not just to kind of win our cause, that our team wins, but to build something collaboratively, we have to think about how to live by that elevated spiritual consciousness. And it's not going to be easy. And so I would love to see, and to be sure, I would love to hear pushback, but I don't think it's true right now that if you are vegan, you are naturally a more spiritual kind person. I do, in my personal experience, it rings true, right? Like my vegan friends that I know are generally like highly sensitive people, but I know I've met many vegan people who are really kind of rough and tough, and that's their one cause, and they don't really care about any other issues or any other causes, or really any other people aside from their own vegan friends. Now, I don't want to elevate them as if they're the mainstream. That's certainly unfair. But I'm saying this only to point back at us, that like how great it would be if we could create this revolution, not by our preaching, but by our living. If the way that we live models such a way, and here I'm again talking to myself as much as to all of us, because I know there's all these opportunities. It is easy to turn on this love and compassion in some spheres and turn it off in other spheres. Some people are very kind to their family at home and not so kind to non-family, and some the opposite, right? And some with people they work with, they're kind, and some with just their friends, and some the opposite. And so that is a hard thing for us to kind of figure out together. And so I want to look at a little bit of Torah here as we think about this. And some of this will be a reminder for some, and some might be new. And when I share it, I want to leave time for conversation and questions here for sure. Oh, Gail, so was that question to me? Oh yes, there I see that now. Yes, yes. So I actually said over there, I actually said over there that I want them to make the choice as to what they wear. I felt telling them to go home to change their shirt would actually alienate them from the cause more. And so I said, oh, that's not something I would ever wear, but I want, but you can make your choice on how you want to dress tonight. Because I do feel that one of the things that's happening in America today, in my view, is that people who feel forced to do things want to do them even less. I mean that's a human phenomenon. It's not an American phenomenon today, right? But in the American phenomenon sense, I think the issue of boundaries, the conversation of what are our boundaries. We might stand up for immigrants and refugees, but people concerned might want to say, well, what are your boundaries on that, right? We might stand for gender fluidity, but then the question around youth and trans surgeries emerge in politics of, well, what are your boundaries there, right? We might stand for that some people should be canceled, right? A Kanye West, I don't want to go to his concert, right? Anti-Semitism. A Brooklyn Nets player, like, yeah, he should be suspended, but like, should we cancel everyone we disagree with, or someone who says something hateful? Like, what are your boundaries? And so too here, I think we wanted, I want to demonstrate that how passionate I am around veganism, and that I'm not looking to, hurt people or take away people's stuff. I think I meet a lot of people in our synagogue vegan challenge that sometimes they're afraid, like, are you going to take my meat, right? Like, what am I going to do if you take my meat? No, we're not going to take anything from you, and because I think that won't work. I think ultimately people have to give it up. And so we see over here the very first verse of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim et Shamayim v'et haaretz, and Rashi very famously says that it says Bereshit bara Elohim. It doesn't say another name of God. It doesn't say Hashem, Yud Hey and Vav Hey. This is because Rashi says in the beginning God intended to create with the attribute of strict justice. God saw that the world could not be sustained this way, and therefore God preceded it with the attribute of compassion and joined it with the attribute of justice, as it says later on the day that Hashem Elohim made the heaven and the earth. And so we see here once again that, like, this world cannot be sustained on strict justice. And that means also for us, like, we're gonna have to live in an imperfect world where it's so infuriating. We might want to demonstrate a lot of wins, but the truth is the wins are slow, right? Yeah, there's some more people going vegan, more people vegetarian, more people reducing, but who I would have thought in 2010 would be much further in 2022, right? That we'd have like half America on board, given the climate change reality, given like how far we've gone with Beyond Meats and Impossible Meats, given what all the cardiac disease studies that have emerged, like, given all we know, like, how is this where we're still at? Yeah, there's wins, but like, I'm disappointed. I thought we'd be a lot further. And so we say, like, okay, that's not how the world is going to change. And God knew that from the beginning. People aren't going to do what we want them to do, and people aren't going to do what they might even think, is right. And so how do we continue to not lead that space from a space of frustration or of anger, but from this place of continuing to promote a higher spiritual consciousness? Rav Hirsch, a great 19th century German rabbi, wrote, compassion is the feeling of empathy, which the pain of one being of itself awakens in another. And the higher and more human the beings are, the more keenly attuned are they to re-echo the note of suffering, which, like a voice from heaven, penetrates the heart. And that's not easy, actually. We see studies now emerging that say our capacity for empathy has dropped. Our ability to understand the pain of another has dropped. We have decided, oh, that's a good person. Oh, that's a bad person. The good person, maybe I can tap into their pain. But that person, either that person is evil because they're in the wrong faith or they're in the wrong political party, or they once hurt me. And because they hurt me, they're clearly an evil person or wronged me in some way. And so, like, I can't really see their pain or feel their pain. And so, maybe a dog bit me. Maybe I had nightmares of lions, right? Maybe I saw the movie Jaws and I thought that all animals are like a shark ready to attack me, right? Something made it impossible for me to see the pain. I can't see the pain, right? And I have to figure out, like, what actually went into my psyche and into my soul that is blocking that. So Rav Shugar writes over here, he was a postmodern Hasidic thinker. He died all too young in Israel. He said, well, we also learn from the Hasidic thought that the obligation for compassion also exists for oneself, and more specifically for one's neshama, on the divine spark that is contained within it and is currently in exile. It is upon us to reconcile with ourselves. There is no greater attribute than internal peace, than the wondrous ability to recognize and feel that I am at peace with my life, my actions, and my soul. This harmony brings about a deep peace and abundant patience. The Admor Hazakin writes, in fact, the true path of lower teshuvah has two aspects. The first is to arouse supernal compassion on a divine soul that has fallen from its elevated level. Okay, then he goes on further. But essentially, this idea that is so clear to us, and there's this great workbook on compassion, and I think if you Google it, it'll come up clearly. Her name is Kristen. I worked through it this last year. Based on this study that shows that what we already know, this direct correlation between our ability to show self-compassion and compassion to others, and work through these barriers of how we can be compassionate to ourselves, to learn this for others. Because when there's that block towards self, there's a blind spot on one's own trauma, a blind spot on one's own healing, then there's going to be blind spots in terms of how we might hurt others, intentionally or unintentionally. And so Rav Shugar reminds us over here that part of the spirituality of this movement needs to be to take care of each other, right? For many Jews, their community are vegan Jews. Their community is not a synagogue, not a JCC. It's their vegan friends, and I don't blame them. They're unaffiliated that many like to blame, that like bailed on the established community. I don't blame anyone who's made that choice. I choose to be affiliated in multiple ways, but I don't blame them. And we're gonna have to figure out how those micro communities of vegans are gonna take care of each other. Some of it's natural, some of them already take care of each other. But we have a whole wealth of Jewish wisdom around sitting Shiva, around chesed practices, kindness practices to care for each other. I have an animal rights friend who just has a very close relative. I won't say more because I don't want to kind of out who she is, but nothing personal I'm going to share, who just lost a very close relative. And, mourns that she grew up in the ultra-Orthodox community and is very far from that now, not really affiliating with anything, and mourns that like in her vegan community, there's not really a system in place to kind of take care of each other like this. Like nobody kind of knew to show up with food. Nobody kind of knew to kind of sit with her for a few hours a day, right? We have to figure out how to like take care of ourselves and take care of each other in this space as well. All right, just the last idea or two, because then I want to, as I said, I want to open it up here for thoughts as well. One is that obviously we wouldn't necessarily be motivated by this, but the sense of how connected this is min hashamayim. It says in the Talmud, Kol hamerachim al habriot merachimim alav min hashamayim. All who have compassion on others will receive compassion from heaven. Now, in my theology, that doesn't mean kind of, the old man with the beard on sky is kind of then sending down, compassion, but rather this oneness, this space that we all exist in, this interconnected unity of life. That when, and people like this when you call it karma, right? But when you put your love into this space, right, that love comes back. And that's not always true. It's complicated, right? But I think that's what the Talmud is trying to get at, is that like, that there's a cosmic impact to doing this stuff. It says over here in Bereshit Rabbah, there's nothing superfluous in the universe. Even flies, gnats, and mosquitoes are part of creation, and as such serve as divinely appointed purpose. And I'll admit my struggle here with mosquitoes. Mosquitoes do pose a threat, not just a bite. Like kids get bites all over them, but there are threats. And I'm really torn because this is an ethic of nonviolence to me. And I really do believe this midrash, that every aspect of life has a purpose and there is a sanctity. And so I have gone as far to, we do own a bug vacuum in our house, the type that you kind of gently suck it into the vacuum and gently release it outside. We use that, consistently, but there are times where there are mosquitoes that are too fast and I swat them and I feel bad about that and torn about that. And part of that is that although I reject anthropocentrism, I am still anthropocentric to some degree in my theology and philosophy and worldview. If I could save a human on the side of the road or an animal, a non-human animal, I would save the human. Thankfully, we're not in that dilemma. Thankfully, that those two are actually interconnected. Saving animals is saving humans. When species are wiped out, that's bad for everyone. That when and vice versa, that it is all interconnected. And so, but I do still have that struggle there, and I share that just because, in case anyone else has that struggle as well. But by and large, I subscribe to this. I really believe in it, even if I'm not living this truth yet. This sense that all of this life is a part of creation, and we're in there together. All right. There's so much I'm going to skip here. There's so much I'm going to skip. I'll just say this last one here. Okay. So yeah, these last two Tanchumas, which are connected from Noach. If a person traveling by ship encounters a great storm, they will throw their possessions and livestock overboard in order to save the passengers. They do not have the same degree of compassion for their animals and possessions as they did for other human beings. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has compassion for animals just as God has compassion for humans, right? As it states in Tehillim, in Ashrei, that God's mercy is upon all God's works. And so we see here a counter to exactly what I shared in my personal behavior. I said, if I saw this dilemma, I would choose this. And God says, no, you're on the lifeboat. You can't make that choice right over there. And now this is not God's only voice in the tradition around this moral dilemma. There's other voices of God, so to speak. But here we see too, this sense that once we stop making that choice, once we see that we're all on the boat together, we can live with that more elevated spiritual consciousness. So I have so much more I'd like to say, but I'd rather pause and hear from others, people's thoughts, questions, and of course, disagreements.
Wow, fantastic, Rabbi. Anybody have any questions? Questions, comments? Feel free to unmute
Hi,
yourself
Gail.
and type in the chat.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, Shmuley. I want to say thank you. It feels so lonely out here sometimes, and coming to a community like this of like thinkers and doers is extremely rejuvenating. Even though I've been on this journey for 20 years and I've heard so much of the information, and it's painful to rehear it so much of the time. But mostly I'm just grateful for this community, and just mostly want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question.
Great.
What you were saying about, first of all, everything you said just resonated. I've been an vegan animal rights activist for 10 years, and I live in Maryland, just outside of DC, and I've lobbied for legislation on Capitol Hill a lot, and as well as in Annapolis, which is our state capital. And so, so I'm very comfortable in that vegan animal rights world. I do other things too, but and so here is my question, and it goes to something that you were just saying, which really hit home for me about sort of not judging others. And heaven knows I don't want to be judged. But being part of the larger animal rights world, which is not all Jewish activists, I'm always a little bit torn because having a great love for Israel and the rising anti-Semitism right now, and just the way things are reported, I find that so many of my very progressive, very liberal animal rights activists who I lobby with, who I do many things with, I are see Israel the way too many people see Israel, as the horrible aggressor and the, they all sorts of things, as we all know. You just have to open a newspaper. And it's a real conflict for me. And I don't know how to reconcile the two. And this has been a conflict for me for years. This is not new. It's getting more so, but it's not new, because we see that so much anti-Semitism, which we used to think was mostly from the right, we also now know, college campuses and elsewhere, that so much of it is also coming from the far left. And I need some wisdom, because it's such, I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about this.
Thanks, Phyllis. Well, in the 1 minute I have left to tackle that enormous conversation would be undoable. But I wanted to share that what you're sharing resonates for me. I feel that many mistakenly made political camps their spiritual home.
Mhm.
They thought that a political ideology was not going to change, and rather than having spiritual communities, they made the politics kind of their god, so to speak. And that's very painful when you lose that community, when you feel that people who you're standing with on many levels are not standing with you. And so I just want to remind us of the story of the Tower of Babel. In Migdal Bavel, there's a whole bunch of problems with building that tower. The first of which is, geez, if all humanity united for a cause, the best you can do is build a tower. Why don't you go build a hospital, go build a peaceful field sanctuary, go build something beautiful and amazing. You're just going to build a tower? That's all you got? The other problem is they all spoke in one voice. I believe God doesn't want us to speak in one voice. And as soon as there is any political bandwagoning where we're all just united in one voice, that's a dangerous place to be, because we need diversity. And so in the animal rights space as well, we need diversity. People to believe different things and take on different causes. And that means us pushing back within that camp as well. If there's anti-Semitism or unfair anti-Israel sentiments in those spaces, then we can say, look, I stand with you on this, but like actually engaging that, right? But what we can't do is have Jews only be in Jewish animal rights coalitions. Which we need to continue to strengthen together. We need to be in those spaces as well. And it's like people are telling me, oh, anti-Semitism is rising on Twitter. I quit Twitter. I said, well, I don't know that quitting Twitter is the answer. Like, yeah, maybe boycotting the ads is part of the answer. But like, we can't leave spaces where these things emerge. And so, but Phyllis, and I'm going to close on this because I'm at my time. But I think this is exactly to the point I'm getting at today. That the point of that we can't check the box of animal rights and veganism and be done. This, that actually people can hate Jews and love animals. And so actually we need this to be a springboard, not a starting place, a floor, not a ceiling, in terms of what we're ultimately trying to build collectively. Thank you, John Netzel, for the invite, and thank you all for all of you present here with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Amazing. Wow. Oh my goodness. Fantastic. I am going to stop the recording and restart it, since this is a long event, so we can kind of break it up into